Isla and Ion were the kind of couple people pointed to when they needed proof that marriage could still be soft, safe, and real. They didn't argue in public. They didn't post dramatic captions online. Their love lived in the small spaces, morning routines, shared glances, inside jokes that didn't need explaining. Friends called them lucky, some called them perfect. Isla used to smile when she heard that. Every morning followed the same quiet rhythm. Ion woke first, always careful not to disturb her. He brewed coffee the way she liked it, strong, no sugar, and left the mug on her side of the bed before getting ready for work. Isla pretended to stay asleep, just to feel the weight of that consistency. When she finally opened her eyes, the smell of coffee felt like reassurance. He hadn't forgotten, he never did. Evenings were simple. Dinner at home most nights, phones set aside, conversations unhurried. Ion listened the way few people did, fully, without waiting for his turn to speak. He remembered details Isla forgot she'd shared. When she talked, she felt safe. When she was silent, he understood. Love didn't need to announce itself between them. It existed in the pauses. And yet, somewhere beneath that safety, something in Isla had begun to stir. It wasn't unhappiness, not exactly. She loved her husband. She trusted him. She never doubted his loyalty. But life had become predictable, and predictability slowly disguised itself as emptiness. Compliments no longer surprised her. Being desired felt assumed, not expressed. She told herself it was normal, that long marriages naturally settled into calm. Still, a quiet question kept returning. Is this all there is? Ion didn't notice the shift at first. Or maybe he did, but trusted her enough not to interrogate it. He believed love was built on space, not suspicion. He showed up in every way that mattered: emotionally present, dependable, kind. He didn't chase attention or perform affection. He believed being constant was enough. For Isla, that constancy started to feel invisible. She missed the rush of being noticed, the spark of someone's eyes lingering, the thrill of feeling chosen again. She never framed it as dissatisfaction with Ion. Instead, she framed it as personal freedom, harmless curiosity. I'm still me, she thought. I'm allowed to feel alive. The dangerous thing about boredom is how convincing it can be. It doesn't arrive loudly. It whispers. It pretends to be self-discovery. Isla didn't see it as a threat to her marriage, only a desire to feel something new without losing what she already had. When the group chat buzzed with plans for a girls' night out, Isla hesitated for only a moment. Drinks, laughter, music, nothing wrong with that? Ion smiled when she told her to have fun, said he'd pick her up later so she wouldn't have to worry about driving. His trust was effortless. As she got dressed that night, Isla caught her reflection in the mirror and felt a flicker of excitement she hadn't felt in a while. She didn't know why. She didn't question it. It was just a girls' night, after all. Harmless. That's what she believed right before everything began to unravel. Isla laughed, a little surprised by how good it felt. Someone said, flirting was just conversation with confidence. No harm in that. No rules broken. Ayla nodded along. She didn't argue. She didn't defend her marriage either. She smiled and sipped her drink, letting their words settle in her chest like permission. At first it was just laughter. Then it became stories about attention, about moments that made them feel desired again. Ayla listened more than she spoke, but each story loosened something inside her. She found herself sharing small things she normally wouldn't, exaggerating reactions, enjoying the way her friends leaned in when she spoke. It felt good to be the center of attention again, even if only for a moment. The compliments became bolder, the jokes sharper. Someone mentioned a man they all vaguely knew, confident, charming, the kind who made rooms tilt toward him. Ayla laughed and, without thinking, added a comment of her own. The table erupted in laughter. Someone clapped, someone whistled. It felt playful, insignificant, just words tossed into the noise of the night. Ayla didn't feel guilty. Ion heard the sentence the way a person hears bad news over a phone call, clear, unmistakable, and impossible to rewind. For a second, he wondered if he'd misunderstood. The music was loud, laughter spilling everywhere, glasses clinking, but her voice cut through it all, familiar, certain, careless. Time slowed in a way he had never experienced before. The sounds of the lounge dulled, as if someone had turned the world down a notch. The laughter that followed her comment felt distant, almost unreal, like it belonged to another room, another life. He stood still, keys cold in his palm, heart steady but heavy. His first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. He replayed the words in his mind, searching for another meaning, another explanation that would soften them. Maybe it was sarcasm, maybe he'd only caught part of it, maybe context would make it harmless. But the more he thought, the clearer it became. The words didn't need context. They stood on their own. A quiet ache settled in his chest. Not the sharp pain of betrayal people talked about, but something deeper and heavier. This wasn't about another man. It wasn't even about flirting. It was about being spoken of as optional, as replaceable, as someone whose presence could be casually dismissed for a laugh. He felt anger then, but it was controlled, almost eerily calm, not the kind that demanded confrontation, but the kind that arrived with clarity. A boundary had been crossed. Something had been revealed. Inside, Alla was still smiling when she lifted her eyes and saw him. The change in her face was immediate. The laughter froze, her smile faltering as recognition set in. Her eyes widened just enough to betray her surprise. For a fraction of a second, hope flickered there too, as if she expected him to interrupt, to say something, to laugh it off with her. Their eyes met. There was no shouting, no accusation, no dramatic scene. Ion didn't raise his voice or ask for an explanation. He didn't need one. Everything he needed to know had already been said. In that moment, Ayla understood something was wrong, but not how deep it went. She opened her mouth, ready to explain, to soften, to undo, but he didn't give her the chance. Ion looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with a quiet finality that frightened her more than any outburst ever could. Then he turned. He didn't slam doors. He didn't call her name. He simply walked away, his footsteps steady, his silence deliberate. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop. Inside the lounge, the music continued. Laughter resumed. Glasses clinked again. But for Ayla, the world had gone eerily quiet. And for Ion, the absence of words was louder than any confrontation could have been. Ayla didn't remember pushing past the crowd or how she ended up outside. All she knew was that the night air hit her face and her heart was racing faster than her thoughts. She scanned the street desperately until she saw Himian already a few steps away, walking with the same calm pace he always had. That calm terrified her. Ion, she called, her voice sharper than she intended. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. She rushed to him, words tumbling out before she could organize them. Wait please, you don't understand. It was nothing. It was just a joke. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, as if proof could still save her. I didn't mean it like that. You're overreacting. That word slipped out too easily. Ion finally turned to face her. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold. It was controlled, distant, as if he'd already stepped somewhere she couldn't reach. That scared her more than shouting ever could. I heard what you said, he replied quietly. She nodded too fast. I know, and I'm sorry, but it didn't mean anything. It was just words. I didn't do anything wrong. I would never actually. She stopped herself, realizing how weak it sounded even as she said it. He listened without interrupting. No crossed arms, no raised voice. Just silence, patient and heavy. When she finally ran out of breath, he spoke. It doesn't have to mean something to hurt, he said, and it doesn't have to be physical to be disrespect. Ayla frowned, shaking her head. I was just having fun. Everyone flirts. It doesn't change how I feel about you. He nodded once, as if acknowledging her truth without accepting it. For you, maybe. But for me, it does. She stepped closer, panic tightening her chest. So you're just going to leave? Over one comment? Ion met her eyes steadily. Over what that comment showed. His words landed slowly, one after another. He wasn't debating, he wasn't defending himself. He was explaining a boundary, not asking permission for it. I won't stay where I'm spoken about like an option, he continued. Where loyalty is treated lightly. That kind of disrespect is betrayal to me. Ayla felt something shift beneath her feet. This wasn't an argument she could win. There was no compromise waiting at the end of this conversation. She reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away, but he didn't hold it either. You're really doing this, she whispered. You're throwing everything away. He shook his head gently. No, I'm choosing not to lose myself trying to ignore this. Her phone buzzed and her hand texts she'd already sent, apologies stacked on top of each other, suddenly meaningless. She realized then that he wasn't storming off to cool down. He wasn't trying to scare her. He had already decided. The panic set in fully now, sharp and suffocating. Please, she said again, her voice breaking. We can fix this. Ion looked at her for a long moment, sadness flickering briefly across his face. Some things, he said softly, can't be fixed. They can only be accepted. And as he walked away once more, Ayla stood frozen, understanding too late that some lines once crossed can never be redrawn. Ayla didn't sleep that night. She lay on her side of the bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to a silence that felt heavier than any argument. His side was untouched. No phone charging, no folded clothes on the chair. Just absence, clean, intentional, final. At first she told herself he would come back. He always did. Ion wasn't impulsive. He was calm, rational. By morning, she thought, this would soften. By tomorrow, it would turn into a conversation. But the hours passed, and nothing changed. With nothing left to distract her, her mind turned inward. Scenes replayed themselves without mercy. Moments she had brushed off before, now returned with clarity. The compliments she'd enjoyed too much. The casual way she'd laughed at attention that wasn't his. The quiet impatience she'd felt when he was simply steady. She had called it boredom. She saw now how easily boredom had disguised entitlement. She had wanted to feel chosen without realizing she already was. Validation had crept in slowly, like a habit she never admitted to forming. At first it was harmless, being noticed, being admired. Then it became necessary. She measured her worth by reactions, by glances, by the way someone else's interests made her feel alive. When that rush faded, she blamed her marriage instead of her hunger for more. It was easier to believe Ion had stopped exciting her than to admit she had stopped appreciating him. She thought about all the times he'd listened without interrupting, remembered details she forgot, made space for her moods without making her feel small. He had never demanded attention. He had trusted that love didn't need to be chased, and she had mistaken that trust for something she could test without consequence. Now she understood his silence. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't even anger. It was self-respect, quiet, unyielding, and devastating in its clarity. Ion hadn't walked away to hurt her. He'd walked away because staying would have meant betraying himself. That realization hurt more than any accusation could have. She reached for her phone again, scrolling through messages she'd sent, apologies layered with explanations, explanations tangled with excuses. She saw them now for what they were, attempts to minimize what she wasn't ready to fully own. She wanted forgiveness without fully accepting responsibility. She wanted reassurance without facing the truth. Love, she realized, doesn't survive entitlement. It doesn't survive the belief that someone will stay no matter how lightly you treat their boundaries. It doesn't survive when gratitude is replaced by assumption, when loyalty is treated as background noise instead of a choice made daily. Ayala sat alone with the weight of that truth, wishing regret could turn back time. But regret offered no comfort, no absolution. There was no dramatic reconciliation waiting at the end of this realization, no guarantee that understanding would earn her another chance. There was only the knowledge that she had been loved deeply and had taken it for granted, and this time there was no one left to forgive her. Ion packed quietly, not in a rush, not with shaking hands, and not with the anger people expected from a man who had been hurt. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, as if he were reminding himself with every folded shirt that this decision was impulsive, it was necessary. The apartment looked the same, yet felt unfamiliar. The framed photo from their first vacation together still sat on the shelf, both of them smiling, unaware of how fragile certainty could be. As he moved through the rooms, memories surfaced uninvited. Late-night conversations on the couch. Promises whispered without witnesses. The unspoken agreement that loyalty wasn't just about bodies but about words, tone, and respect. He had always been clear about who he was. He believed love was a choice made daily, not a feeling that excused carelessness. He believed dignity mattered, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. When Ayla finally stood in the doorway, eyes tired, voice fragile, he didn't look away. He didn't harden either. There was sadness in his expression, but no bitterness. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," she said softly. He nodded once. "I know." She searched his face, as if hoping to find doubt, something she could hold on to. "Can we at least talk about this?" "We already have," he replied gently. Her breath caught. "So that's it." Ion paused then, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted his words to be honest and final. "I won't compete with attention," he said calmly. "I won't explain my worth or ask to be chosen. If I stay after this, I lose myself." The room felt smaller after that. He thought about the vows they'd made, not just the spoken ones, but the quiet promises lived out in daily life, to protect each other's dignity, to be safe places, not sources of doubt. He hadn't failed those promises. Walking away was the only way to keep them intact. Ayla stepped closer, tears finally spilling. "I never stopped loving you. I believe you," he said, and meant it. But love isn't enough when respect is treated lightly. There was no drama in his goodbye. No raised voice, no slammed doors. He picked up his bag, glanced once more at the life he had built, and walked toward the door. His heart ached, but his steps didn't falter. He wasn't leaving because he didn't care. He was leaving because he cared enough about himself to refuse a version of love that required silence in the face of disrespect. As the door closed behind him, Ion felt the weight of loss, but beneath it, something steadier, peace. Not the kind that comes from winning an argument, but the kind that comes from honoring your values, even when it costs you everything. In that moment, walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength. The apartment felt impossibly large without Ion. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, the ticking clock echoed in a way that made her chest tighten. She moved from room to room, half expecting him to appear, to ask if she wanted coffee, to comment on something trivial, anything that would remind her he was still there. But he wasn't. The silence was constant, heavy, almost suffocating. Mornings were unbearable. Her hand reached instinctively for her phone, hoping for the familiar message. The quiet, "Did you sleep well?" Nights were worse. She wrapped herself in blankets, trying to hold on to comfort, but the bed felt impossibly cold. His absence wasn't dramatic, it was persistent, a quiet weight pressing against her every thought. Her friends fell silent too. At first they tried to comfort her, offering excuses, bad timing, alcohol, a misunderstanding, but the words dried up quickly. They didn't know what to say, because there was no simple explanation. Conversations shifted, laughter stopped, and eye contact lingered a second too long before breaking. She felt utterly alone, alone with her memories. She replayed that night endlessly, every detail sharp in her mind. The music, the laughter, the carefree way she had spoken. One sentence, careless and unthinking, had undone everything. Years of trust, affection, and shared history unraveled not through an affair, not through obvious betrayal, but through a few words. It stunned her how fragile everything had been. Love hadn't failed them. Ion hadn't failed her. She hadn't failed in the way people expect betrayal to look. What failed were boundaries. She had treated like suggestions instead of rules. She had assumed loyalty was permanent, respect unconditional. She remembered his silence that night and afterward. Now it wasn't a mystery. It wasn't punishment. It was so. He had walked away not because he stopped loving her, but because staying would have meant betraying his values, compromising his dignity. And she understood, too late, that some choices can't be reversed. Days passed, then weeks. The messages she sent, apologies, explanations, desperate attempts at repair, had no effect. Silence spoke louder than anything she could say. The loss settled in slowly. Then, all at once, she mourned the life she thought would always be there. She mourned herself, the version of her who hadn't realized how easily love could be undone. Some mistakes don't scream, they whisper. Hers hadn't shouted. It had laughed, flirted, and disappeared into the night, taking with it everything she had taken for granted. Have you ever thought a single word, a careless joke, or a fleeting comment, wouldn't matter only to realize it changed everything? That's what happened to Isla. One sentence, spoken without thought, altered the course of a marriage that everyone admired, proving how fragile trust can be when boundaries are ignored. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's an invitation for betrayal. Loyalty isn't measured only in actions. It's in respect, attention, and the little things we sometimes take for granted. Ion didn't leave out of anger, revenge, or loss of love. He left because he refused to compromise his dignity. His silence wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. It was protection of himself and the values that defined him. Isla's story reminds us that self-respect isn't optional in love. Choosing peace over chaos, boundaries over blind tolerance, sometimes means walking away from someone you still care for. It wasn't easy for Ion. Every step away carried a weight of memories, of promises kept, of love that still existed in his heart. But it was necessary. Some lessons aren't learned in arguments, they are understood in absence. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever said something you thought didn't matter only to realize it changed everything? Do you believe emotional boundaries are as important as physical loyalty? Was Ion right to walk away, or should love forgive careless words? Comment your thoughts below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes, understanding the cost of a single moment can change the way we love forever.